Welcome back to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast. This is a platform to showcase people doing great work and talk about hot topics in residence life and college student housing. I'm guest hosting today. Once again, my name is Stewart Robinette. I use he, him pronouns. And for almost 20 years, I served in various res life and housing roles throughout the East Coast in many different institutions. Now, although I stepped away to now become a civil servant, I am still keeping my ear to the ground and also my eyes out there, seeing what's happening out there in the res life and housing world. And I'm very excited about what we're going to be talking about today. I've got my good friend Jean on the line here with us today. Hey, Jean.
Hey, Stewart.
And we're going to be talking about unionization in res life. And the reason that I love that we're going to be having Jean on here today is because she is seen as one of the experts in the field, because in the US, and she may correct me in a second if I'm wrong, I believe that her institution that she was at, and I won't date when it happened, but she may do it, or you can look it up afterwards, was the first institution in the US to have an RA student group petition and successfully unionize, and they have remained a union up into this day too. So I will share that this is also near and dear to my heart. I also had a petition, as you know, Jean. And one of the great things about Jean is that she's one of the first person that I spoke to, because Jean's that type of a person that just calls you and is like, hey, heard this is going on, friend. Is there any way I can help? So once again, I just want to thank Jean for being on here and helping once again in this discussion that we're going to have. But I want to stop for a second and make sure that I've given you the due that you need, Jean. Do you mind doing a quick intro to yourself and just a little bit about yourself and your history with RA unionization?
Absolutely, Stewart. So I'm Jean, as Stewart indicated, Jean MacKimmie. I am the Director of Residential Life at UMass Amherst. I was at UMass when the RAs petitioned to unionize in 2001, so I will provide you with the date. I was also here when our peer mentors, which is a live-in position, petitioned to join that group in 2014. I currently serve as the director, so I am on the bargaining team for management, have bargained 3 successor contracts and lots of impact bargaining agreements during the COVID pandemic. So we were the only ones for a very long time at UMass Amherst that had unionized resident assistants. So I was really the only person with experience, not a chosen area of expertise, but certainly a place where I was the only person really who had the experience.
And I know that many people have called upon that experience, and you continue to share it. And I know that we are always so thankful that you do that, Jean. And the thing that I'm really excited about with this kind of discussion that we're going to have is that many of our listeners and viewers may remember that recently Roompact and ACPA hosted it's about, I think, an hour-long or 90-minute webinar on your staff is unionizing. How does it work? And it was about one of your staff members, right? Was it Tyler Bradley that did it? Am I remembering correctly?
Yes, correct.
He did a great job. I encourage all of our viewers and listeners to take a listen to that if you haven't already. But we're going to be taking a different view on it because you can read about how it works and hear great from Tyler on that. But we wanted to get into a res lifey topic on it, and we wanted to get into the feelings of it. So I hope you all are ready to get into the feelings of unionization and what it means. So let me just jump into this kind of question that whenever I've talked to anybody, people have mentioned this to me, Jean. They ask me this. I know that when I first started talking to you about this and you called me up that day, it was one of the first things you started talking to me about. And it's this. If you've had a RA union at UMass Amherst for many, many years now, does having that union change the relationship in the community that your staff and your residents and your student staff that they have there at UMass?
Honestly, for us, it hasn't. I mean, we have a great residential program. We have been able to shift and change that program over time based on the needs of students and trends in the field. There are certainly moments in unionization where it does change the relationship. That during the pandemic, when we were talking about impact bargaining around the various different issues, it was hard. And it was sometimes contentious. But overall, we've been able to run a really good program and have great relationships with our student staff.
And I remember when you and I spoke about that, that brought relief to me because in many ways, and maybe this was just my own feelings at the time where it was such an unknown thing or where it would be different, it was thought like it could bring this like horrible, horrible change that would completely, you know, take the direction that we want to take community building in a different way. So that you haven't experienced that at all, right?
No, and I do think because we're a large campus, I don't, the supervisors of RAs aren't in the management bargaining position, right? And so, and I don't put any of the other members of my team in that position so that RAs can see them as supervisors and leaders, and that RAs can go to their supervisors with concerns and not also see them as management. So my experience is from a large institution, and there is some separation.
Well, and I'm sure that your frontline professional staff really appreciate that too, because I know with my staff when I had them, the relationship that you had with your student staff was so important. And I mean, even for me, when I look back when I was a frontline staff member, those memories are just incredible. And some of the relationships I've kept with RAs that I was their hall director of. Um, you know, I talked that I wanted to focus a little bit more on the emotional part. We had some good conversations leading up to this podcast. We wanted to focus on kind of the feelings that go along with it. So this is where for some of our, I want to say younger, but I'll say less experienced audience members, this may be easy for them, but for Jean and I, give us a little bit of support here because we're going to go a little bit back in time, which is longer than some of you all. But I wanted to really focus on kind of the memories of when that petition first hit your desk, Jean. I know that I was really lucky. I had been in law school, I'd focused on labor law. And so logistically, and as far as how the process would happen, I felt kind of good about that. And that was known. The emotional part was a lot different for me to navigate. But I'm curious from your perspective, what was it like for you? Do you remember those feelings and what it was like?
Yeah, so I was not the director, so the petition did not land on my desk, which was good. We were in a very different time. I mean, the thought of undergraduate student staff forming a union in 2001 was unprecedented. I know the campus, resisted at every step of the process, engaging in that process, until it decided finally to bargain a contract.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, for the leadership in residential life at that time, it was really challenging. And we were in the news. Our chancellor wrote to the Chronicle of Higher Education.
Mm-hmm.
Chancellor also wrote to students asking them to resist the petition. I mean, it was
Mm.
quite contentious. And those of us, I was an assistant director at that time. I mean, those of us in the field were just really trying to continue to work and do good work. Also, to be perfectly honest, I was pregnant on leave and parenting an
Oh,
infant
wow.
during that 1 year period of the petition to the vote. And so I was sleep deprived. I don't remember a
Mhm.
lot, but I do really remember focusing on live-in staff and the RAs, make sure that they felt supported and valued through that really kind of public process.
Well, before we start talking about the live-in staff and your focus on them, because that's been one of the hallmarks I know of your professionalism throughout the years, the way you really focus on your staff members, your team members. I want to focus on how others supported you during that time. Now, granted, you were on the leave, and had you had your child yet, or were you getting ready to have? I know a petition usually is a long process.
I had my child right in the middle between petition and vote.
Wow. So how did your supervisor or other people in the field or colleagues, what type of support did you get, and what were maybe some of the things that weren't so supported during the time?
I don't remember a lot of support from the field. I think other people were like, "What is happening at UMass
Mm,
Amherst?" and didn't really know how to talk about it because it was so new. I had an outstanding supervisor at that time, and so felt like she was really able to balance kind of being in that management level and doing that and still really supporting the team. And so I felt very supported. I felt very supported during my leave. So overall, overall had a good experience, and it was hard.
Right, right. And well, and that's one of the things, right? You can have a hard experience, but still be really good and really supportive. But at the end of the day, you're like, "Wow, that's really hard." I think it changed with my experience because the support of the field was there. I remember I got a call from Mary De Niro from Akua Y. I got a call from you. I got calls from other mentors and resources out there. And I guess that's something that's changed over the years. One thing that is probably different too, and I just want us to really highlight going back to 2001 versus now. I know you speak to people about this. Social media and the way we communicate and the way society kind of takes information and puts it out there has really changed.
Mhm.
Any kind of memories of kind of the emotional impact at that time on you or your team versus what you hear from others looking at that kind of social media dynamic that wasn't present? I mean, it was present 2001, right? I mean, I'm always a late adopter with technology. I don't know about you, but 2001, I mean, it was there, but not like it is now, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, one, it was over 20 years ago, so you're testing my memory. And I was sleep deprived. It felt like a very campus-based issue at the time
Mm,
from my recollection. Like I don't remember a lot of other conversations about it.
yeah,
Certainly was getting attention at the state level. The people in the director level positions may have had very different experiences
right,
than I
right.
did.
Well, let's talk about the staff then, because you mentioned about the support that staff was receiving at the time. Um, when I got the petition and we shared it with the staff and everyone else, it was tough because I remember others, and I'll go back to social media now. There was a lot of negativity put on social media about what my frontline staff had done to cause the RAs to unionize, which couldn't have been further from the truth. The staff was amazing at that time, and they had great relationships with the RAs. Um, but supporting them became one of the things that I was missing a little bit at the beginning. And then as a university, really had to figure out how to support that professional staff. What have been your experiences with that at the time? And kind of as you advise others and have seen others as we kind of enter in today's age, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, one of the first things I say to people is what you talked about. It's not personal,
Mm,
right? A decision for RAs to petition to unionize is not about Jean. It's not about Stewart, right? And it's not about some decision we
mm-hmm.
made. There's a lot of factors. Those factors are different campus to campus, student, you know, group to student group. So I think that that's really important. I think, it does take a considerable amount of time from the director level when there is a petition to unionize. So,
Right.
campus meetings, you get into bargaining, you start identifying what all the proposals are. I mean, there's just through that process, there's a lot of time. That time looks different depending on how the campus decides to approach it, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
they, agree to go, immediately go to bargaining and accept the petition or fight the petition, etc. But really thinking through how as the leader of the department, you can carve out that time and still support staff and take
Right.
that time to support staff. And understand what the campus dynamics and expectations are around what you're sharing, what you're not sharing, what you're able to talk about, what you're not able to talk about. That varies campus to campus. I was just looking earlier on a couple of campuses' websites that really outline kind of process and frequently asked questions for their student staff. When we didn't do that at UMass in 2001. So
Right.
it seems like they were able to talk a little bit more about what was happening. We weren't, like, we didn't
Mm-hmm.
talk about it with our student staff, and I still don't talk about kind of what's the details of bargaining and what's on the table with the staff. that I'm working with. And so for me, it's about kind of helping them understand where we are in process,
Hmm.
making time that people can come and ask questions or get support, or they're dealing with some, their student staff are saying one thing. Can I tell them, like, can I help them process through that? So it's
Right.
really for me, it's a time challenge,
Hmm.
a lot of ways. And if you are, I mean, you have to have those relationships with your staff to start, right?
Right. Right. Oh, the relationships are key because I remember there was a time before kind of conversation just zipped up around me from my frontline staff, realizing that, hey, if they're not talking openly here, two things are happening, and both of them are bad. One, they're not talking about it all, and they're just bottling it, which is not healthy, right? And the other thing is they're talking about it amongst each other, but with no direction and no answers to their questions. And,
Right.
I think when you talk about the relationships, and it's one of the core principles, right? The importance that plays into it is huge. If we could go back to where you were talking about, because this sparked a question in my mind. If we could go back to where you were talking about, you said UMass at first came out really against it, and I mean, I don't think we're sharing any gossip or secrets. It was pretty public, right? The
Very public. You can still find things online about what we did.
So it's pretty public. Um, I realized early on that I had to be careful with the tone that I was seeing from, I call them the higher ups or your senior leadership, but like provosts and presidents and, the people in the suits, your inside counsel or outside counsel, about how I was making sure that I was thinking about how I take the emotions that I'm seeing from them or how they're processing it, and not potentially saying, okay, that's the way I should be with my staff or others. When you've talked to others, have you heard that type of a sentiment, and how have you advised, people to navigate the emotions associated with navigating your own emotions while trying to also help, your frontline staff, your middle management navigate it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Stuart. Even when our peer mentors petitioned in 2014, is that what I said it was? The university filed with the Massachusetts Labor Relations Commission to
Hmm.
block that petition as well. And so, and I was involved in going to the hearing and all those things. And for me, relationships became a really critical part of that.
Hmm.
Although I had to go to the Department of Labor in Springfield and, talk about why this shouldn't happen, my
Hmm.
relationships with the student staff still needed to be positive. So I think sometimes, like, I was in the hallway talking to them outside of this hearing and then going into the hearing room to have a different conversation. And that felt
Hmm.
strange for some people. It didn't feel strange for me, right? So, like, how do you continue to value the people,
Right. Right.
right, that are working in residential life and the work that they do when the university may not be valuing the petition to unionize, which are very
Hmm.
different things, right?
Yeah. Part of that valuing too is when we talk about valuing viewpoints, and unionization, at least from my experience, has become very well, it hasn't become. I think it's always been since the rise of it. I mean, I'll share a little bit about my background that I don't think we've ever talked about. I grew up in the coal camps of Appalachia, right? And my, father was a coal miner, and so I've seen unionization both from management side and also from the worker side, and from those that are unionized that are workers and those that aren't unionized as workers. And what I have kind of made as my own viewpoint is that it's not good nor bad. It also in my mind, it's not that it just is what it is, but it can be good or it can be bad depending on what the environment is and what the ultimate outcome is, right? But I guess what I'm getting at there is when you're having to navigate what can be a very dualistic type of, like, I'm either for unions or against unions because I have this political leaning or that political leaning, or I know this person that is, did you navigate that with any of your team members, or have you ever encountered that? And what's your advice on that?
UMass Amherst is a highly unionized campus. And
Hmm.
so that is part of our fabric. I mean, we have multiple unions. Our graduate students were unionized before our undergraduate staff. So we're our professional staff. And so I think we had a little bit less of that. There were certainly people who didn't understand it, didn't have
Yeah.
experience, were wondering why people were doing this, didn't understand why they were in a union as a professional staff member, and those kinds of things. So there certainly was a range of views um, within the residential life staff. There
Yeah.
probably still are, although people come here knowing that, we're a union shop. And so that's part of the experience.
Hmm.
And there are positives and challenges.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not good or bad. There's both all mixed up in the sauce, right? Of both positives and challenges of having unionized undergraduate students in particular.
Right. Right. How do you advise? I just want to drill in a little bit more. Like, are there times before you're having a conversation with someone you can tell that they're very, very pro-union or they're very, very, anti-union, and how does that kind of show itself in the workplace? And what's your advice for maybe managers or those team members if this happens?
Right. I think I see less or anti-union here just because of the environment that
That
we're
makes
in.
sense. Yeah.
I think very, very pro-union. I mean, I think there are, I have experienced there being challenges of unionized staff also supervising unionized staff and kind of navigating if you're adamantly, in support of how do you help people make decisions about their own position on this, on whether to join the union or not,
Mhm.
or be part of the vote and those kinds of things. And so I think that's what's harder is having people personally be very positive and sit with someone else who's trying to make those decisions about what this means for them.
Mm.
Um, when I was very early in my career, I sat in the same, like I was a residence director when the professional staff unionized at UMass Amherst. And
Okay.
I had no union experience prior to
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
My father was a owner of a small machine shop, had a very small staff.
Yeah.
Those folks were not union. I learned a lot from my father about managing employees that I really appreciate. So it was new to me and I didn't really understand why as a professional staff member, I needed a union, and so it took me some
Yeah.
time to understand that, right? Why that might be beneficial, what might be some of the challenges. So I went through that same process.
And now you're seen as probably one, if not the expert with RA unionization in the US.
I know, funny, huh?
I wanted to take a moment to think about a group of staff that is sometimes forgotten, that's near dear mouths. It's middle management, and I think middle management, just because one of the primary things is how do they not control communication, but really help with communication. What sage advice do you have for middle management or those supporting middle management when a petition comes or when a staff may look like they're going to be unionizing?
I would say a few things. My first thing I said before, don't take it personally.
Mm,
Right? Is really kind of, you have to understand your own feelings about it,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and learn some things, but you also need to not, in order to move through this process, you have to do some of that management of emotions, for
Yeah.
yourself
Oh
and
yeah.
not on other people, right? And so, I think having a network of colleagues outside of your institution is always important, not just in a unionization situation, like having those people, other places that you can talk to who can give you that
Mm-hmm.
support is really valuable. Because there may be things you can't talk about on your own campus that you could then talk with colleagues about.
Right, right.
Um, Really, asking the questions about what you're able to talk about and not. Again, different campuses have very different perspectives on how you can engage with people on this conversation when there's a
Mm-hmm.
petition. You may have to just say to everyone, I'm not at liberty to have this conversation if that's where that your institution
Mm-hmm.
stands. Um, which I still see as transparent, right? If you can say,
Right.
I am not able to like to just avoid it, I don't think is helpful. But if you can
Oh
say, I
yeah.
can't talk about this,
Yeah, or maybe seeing where you can take the discussion of parts that you can talk about, or at least explaining why you can't talk about
Right.
it. I've been in those situations to where it's avoidance rather than just acknowledging, hey, I know this is going on, but I can't talk about it. Just saying those words are so powerful to your team members, especially those that you're supervising.
Right. And you can still listen. I mean, you may be all not to talk about it, share your view, share what's happening on campus. You can still listen,
Hmm.
help people make decisions without influence, right? Like
Right.
we all learned good listening skills in the course of
Mhm.
our career around helping people like unpack what they're thinking. And I think most of the time we can do that.
Mhm.
Right.
Well, and then taking what you've heard also and making sure that you're passing that conversation up appropriately. Like that, I know that can also be difficult when it doesn't get passed on. Like we're so good sometimes at the communication aspects, and there's other times where I'm like, man, we really missed it there as a team. We could have managed that better and made better decisions if we just had the communication flowing there on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sharing up, I think taking care of yourself.
Mhm.
You can't take care of other people if you're not taking care of yourself. I think the other, we residential life people, whether it's directors, mid managers, we are the experts in our work, right? The
Mhm.
the labor people, the HR people, the councils on our campus are experts in their work.
Right.
They don't know necessarily what a resident assistant does and what's
Mhm.
important about the program. And so really recognizing our expertise too, and
Mhm.
middle management to share their expertise with and knowledge of what's happening on the ground with folks who are at the table. I find that really valuable when people are like,
Mhm.
hey, heads up, Gene, this is what's being talked about right now. It's like, thank you very much. I can
Yep.
prepare for that.
I just want to highlight what you said there because that's been such an important, like, kind of guidepost for me. Is speak when you're at the table with others, and we talk about imposter syndrome, something like that. Just because it's a lawyer with a JD from a fancy, law firm, just because it's a provost, if you're at that table, it's because your opinion and your voice matters, and you can sway the direction that the strategy or the way you're going to support your team or be able to recover from what can sometimes be very difficult event by using your voice when you have it. So you know don't listen to me on this, listen to Jean because she said it first, but I had to highlight that. Jean, I think it's so important. um, I know we're getting to the end of our time here, and I'm so appreciative of you joining us on this podcast. But I wanted to circle back to the beginning of our discussion and really just make sure that our listeners kind of hear what your experience has been and your views on it. So I'm going to ask it again, like if one of our listeners gets faced with a petition to unionize, or their director, if they happen to not be the director, or they happen to maybe be on leave for pregnancy or other reason, right? Um, but if they get faced with a petition, their office gets faced with a petition, is it that big of a deal?
From my experience, I have not found, I mean, our original, it was a big deal in people's perceptions. Um, I think it depends on your campus culture and
Mhm.
some of those things around kind of how much of an impact it's going to have. So it could be, it might not be, and I think we are longstanding. Our department didn't fall apart. We have made changes. We've continued to be a strong residential program. We do some things better, I think, because we have unionized staff around our training and our expectations and our consistency and those kinds of things. There are
Mhm.
challenges too. And so those are just things like we have to understand, but it's not the end of the world. And I do think if we look at the current trend, we're going to see more of
Mhm.
this. And so you know, the Northeast in particular seems to be very busy in this area right now.
Yes, yes, we're seeing those there. I love the point that you're making there. I remember my associate dean at the time. We were about halfway through the petition, gathering all the information, and we had this kind of aha moment. By we heated, I want to give credit where credit is due there to Tim Miller, and he said, "Look, at the end of the day, we're either going to have an RA union or we're not going to have an RA union. So the most important thing for us right now is to support our students and support our staff to make sure that no matter where it ends up, we're able to continue to build the community that we're building." And it sounds like that's something that has guided your practice too. So I just always take that quote away with me that Tim said to me, because it just really stuck out of my mind that day when he said that to me.
That is very wise. So thank you for sharing it.
Jean, I want to thank you again for chatting with us, for sharing your expertise. I know I can't speak on behalf of the profession, but I feel I must, for sharing your expertise with the profession when anyone calls, or when you called them. I know that I was very grateful for it. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago when you called me. But again, thank you so much. Remember too, out there that are listening and viewing this, the experts that you have there, the groups like Roompact that is putting out webinars on this topic, their blog posts where they've got writings on it too, but also your associations, others. We're a tight community to be able to support each other, to help each other make the best decisions so that we can all rise up together on this. If you ever have any topics that you want Roompact to be able to speak about on ResEdChats, please, please, please send those on to us. We would love to hear them so that we can meet you all where you are and provide those types of podcasts. But other than that, thank you, Roompact, for letting me do this guest hosting opportunity again. Hopefully I get to come back. And with that, we'll see you sometime soon. Bye, everybody.